Graham. And also thanks very much to be invited along, I suppose, to tag on the end of these three. They've actually done very well in their timings and left me some time. So I suppose where I want to start is where I spoke to this group probably 5 years ago. And I think Roger was probably one of the first ones to really click into this, to be involved with the research on the ground. And that was certainly one of those observations that I made back in those days when I was with MLA. And there were lots of, as I said, there were lots of groups making decisions on what customers wanted. But how do they know what the customer wants? Who deals with those customers? It's the processor. We are the link between the producer and the product that's being grown and the customer and the consumer at the other end. The industry producer processor relationship, it's been disjointed. It's a hell of a lot better now than what it has been. Feedback has been terrible back to producers. And there was a great deal of mistrust in the industry. I would suggest that currently as we speak, a lot of that has changed, certainly in the areas that I work in. Processors traditionally have kept their cards close to their chests. However, as processors, we cannot criticise those if we aren't prepared to open our doors and share information back on the decisions that were being made. We also need to be very transparent about the customer feedback. And it still rings true today with around some of the industry that we see. So I suppose I'll start with the lamb supply chain group. So from what Alex has spoken into where we sort of became involved. I was a little bit involved with it from an MLA perspective when I came to work for JBS 9 years ago. I had a report that we'd done back in 2007 based on lamb feedback. And really when we looked around Australia and we looked at the measurements that were being taken, and what was out there was a hot standard carcass weight and a palpated fat. I'd come up through the ranks of MSA looking at what was there from a beef perspective. And I lived and breathed that feedback. So the first thing was, and in the first day when we had Dave Pethick, Alex Ball, Richard Apps, Tim Hollier out of the DPI, Bruce Hancock in a room in Melbourne, and I threw this down on the table and said, fellas, we've got to do something about this. This information flow back to producers is pretty ordinary. That was our first JBS lamb supply chain group. By the end of the day, there was a lot of banging on desks and swearing and carrying along, but at the end of it, everyone within the room had a real clear understanding of where everyone else sat. And that was the first real go-ahead moment. And it also allowed us the discussion in around the OCM, because we knew that the measurements that we currently had, their palpated fat, weren't really up to the standards. So our core focuses since then haven't actually changed. It's still around MSA sheep meat eating quality. We're still looking around processing efficiencies, and as a processor, we should never take our eye off that. I've got John Berry all the time ringing in my ears on every decisions we make that says we are in the business of taking costs out of our business, not putting costs back in. So we need to concentrate on that, the lean meat yield side of it. And the feedback, the producer engagement, the producer link or the producer actually relay back to it. And this hasn't changed from when I first spoke, actually when we go back 9 years ago to when I first spoke 5 years ago. I also had a very wise person say to me once, Mark, there are plenty of box lids in the Australian meat industry, but there's not too many brands. And by what I mean is, a lot of processors in the past have thought a brand was a Flash Harry picture on the box lid. But what sits in behind it? What is actually in the box that differentiates us against someone else or us against another country? Premium product has been sold as a commodity over the years. So how do we change that? Because generally what happens is Roger, ourselves, ALC, TFI, WAMCO, we all sell into the same markets, into the US. And the trouble is, our product gets sold on price. And then what happens is, it's a race to the bottom on price. So what we need to do as an industry, as a country, is differentiate that product. Get out of that cycle. And the JBS Great Southern Lamb, it was the first part to attempt to differentiate that, and that was purely based on a farm assurance program. But the interesting thing is, the map's already there. So from a lamb perspective, the mapping and the hard work has been done. It's been done in MSA beef. If we look at the branding scenarios that we've done as a company, we've got Great Southern, the overarching brand. We've got an MSA index here, and we batch those animals or group those animals together in like eating quality outcomes. So you can start, we look down here at Hereford Boss, sits at around about a 59, top 25% of all eating quality animals in Australia. 3.6, 3.7 million animals graded under the MSA scheme in beef, and Hereford Boss sits in that. Great Southern and King Island sits in the top 10. Pinnacle, we started to differentiate our product based on eating quality, sits in the top 5. And this fella over here, Little Joe's, it sits in the top 1%. So the mapping is already there. We know what we have to do. We've just got to go through and achieve it. And it's the carcass measurements that we need to do that. So palpation, yep, we're having a guess. GR knife, we're getting better. At JBS, 2 years in there, we implement a GR knife through every single plant. DEXA, we've got one part of the puzzle. We've got the lean meat yield. And IMF, it's the second part, and that's that hyperspectral camera or hyperspectral probe or however we get to it. We need the IMF figure to be able to do what we've done in beef and split them up based on branding. The other thing is the producer loop. This is the way that we've traditionally been giving information back to producers. It's a bit hard to see, I know, but even when you've got the paper in front of you, it's a bit hard to see and understand. This is the way that we've gone by adopting livestock data link, clear, concise, easy to interpret, easy messages to get back to producers. And this is the one that's been really exciting for the past. If you've supplied to a JBS company in the last 6 or 7 years, you've got a lean meat yield figure in there based on the algorithm. And this is what's coming. This is actual data that comes out of Bordertown plant, split up into total carcass lean, total carcass fat, total carcass bone. We then go off into the forequarter lean, forequarter fat, forequarter bone, middle lean, middle fat, middle bone, hindquarter lean, hindquarter fat, hindquarter bone. I saw this in New Zealand 8 years ago. They were doing it via Viascan. So we've been miles behind other countries in the world in regards to that. And this is what it's going to look like when it comes back to producers. That's a kill sheet. Don't worry about the names, and it's made up. But the kill sheet, individual body numbers, individual NLRS and RFID, fat class, weight, and your lean, fat, and bone. That's an actual kill sheet that's going to fall back to producers. So, with that extra carcass data, this is what, and David's mentioned it, and Alex put it up there. This is what we're going to be able to do. The MSA model cut 2. An MSA index up here. And if we can get a whole MSA index for a carcass, we can then go the same way that we've done from a beef perspective. And then we can start producing brands based on an eating quality outcome. So in summary, the lamb supply chain group was the catalyst for understanding the OCM. We need to differentiate, whether it's farm assurance or whether it's eating quality or some other means. We already have the commercial drivers. We've seen it in beef. Dave shows the figures around potential to pay. We know it works in beef, and we really feel that it'll work in lamb. We're almost there with OCM, and clear market signals and feedback is going to be essential. Thanks, Grant.